I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And today we are talking about Fawlty Towers, another BBC sitcom. We did quite a few of those last year. And very famously, as everybody knows, only 12 episodes of Fawlty Towers were ever made. 6 in 1975 and 6 in 1979. And it's fair to say that Fawlty Towers came about because of the success of, or as a kind of follow-up to the success of, Monty Python's Flying Circus. And indeed, as everybody also knows, it was while the Monty Python team was staying in a hotel in Torquay that they met the person in real life, the hotel manager, who was the inspiration for the character of Basil Fawlty, who had told Terry Gilliam he was using his knife and fork wrong, and the Monty Python team thought it was a very inappropriate thing to do, and it was done in a very inappropriate way, and the whole thing span off from there. And of course, Connie Booth, who wrote Fawlty Towers with John Cleese, had appeared in Monty Python as one of the women, so it certainly did spin off from Monty Python in many ways. Something else that everybody knows is that John Cleese and Connie Booth were married during the first series of Fawlty Towers, and they'd actually got divorced by the time they wrote together and starred in together the second series of Fawlty Towers, which is good, really, isn't it? Because it shows that although they realised their marriage wasn't going to be a long-term success, they still respected each other enough as people and comedy writers and performers to do some more great work together, which I think is very heartwarming. And of course we didn't see Fawlty Towers when it was first on, because we hadn't been born yet. But we saw it on one of these repeat runs that keep getting mentioned on these podcasts. And there were a few of them in the 90s, and I think it was a lot to do with working out what sitcoms the BBC wanted to release on video, which they were doing a lot of at the time, as I've said. And like Blackadder, The Red Dwarf, Fawlty Towers was shown on the BBC in repeats during the 90s, and that was when we watched it. It wasn't the very first exposure we'd had to Fawlty Towers, though. We'd heard some episodes on tape, which had some sound bites from the show and narration, new narration, specially provided by Andrew Sachs in character as Manuel. So we knew something about it.
I only remember listening to one scene on Daddy's tapes in his car by the time we got round to watching it anyway, and it was this scene where a child is telling Belle, I don't like the chips. And then when it got to that scene, while we were watching it on the television, I thought, oh, that's what that was.
I do remember listening to a few episodes, but I don't think I would remember the details if I hadn't subsequently seen them on the television. I remember hearing The Germans, which, as everybody also knows, is the one that got lots of people interested in it and had a rating spike and made them repeat the whole first series immediately afterwards, and it became really, really popular. But I hadn't realised, listening to the tape version, that Basil had concussion while he was doing all the Don't Mention the War stuff, which did make a lot more sense in the TV version. And I know we listened to Basil the Rat from Series 2 on tape at one point, and I remember a bit from Gourmet Night, which is the episode before The Germans, penultimate episode of Series 1, where Manuel, Andrew Sachs as Manuel, describes what happens. Kurt, he'd wake up just in time to be sick all over the place with mullet, and then when I watched the TV version, I thought, I don't think I would have realised what had happened there if I hadn't heard the tape.
I just remember I don't like the chips, and I'm struggling to remember which episode that is now. Is it Gourmet Night?
It is, isn't it? Because we always think there aren't any guests staying at the hotel in Gourmet Night, just visitors coming in later paying for dinner, and then we remember, oh yes, there's this guest family and they do the chips are awful scene.
They're the wrong shape and they're just awful. We quote that sometimes, don't we?
Because many people and things are the wrong shape and just awful, as we know from our everyday lives. But then this repeat run was coming on, and our parents both were going around saying, oh, Fawlty Towers, wonderful Fawlty Towers, we'll have to record that, it's so brilliant. So obviously they had enjoyed it in the 70s, like so many people had, and we enjoyed it as well during the repeat run. They always seem to mess up their repeat runs. reruns in some way. And we were discussing while watching the whole thing through on DVD last week how it's a strange decision with what they did in that repeat show through to transpose episodes 1 and 3. And we'll have a word about the episodes in a little bit. Let's talk about the main characters. That will probably make us say most of the things we want to say. As everybody definitely knows, John Cleese played Basil Fawlty, the hotel owner/manager, and I was saying to you the other day, how fair is it to say that Fawlty Towers is a showcase for the comedy talents of John Cleese, which of course is no bad thing, and the others are there to kind of back him up and interact with him and bounce off him and make things he's doing funnier in certain ways. And you said it was quite a fair thing to say, I think.
Yes, it's hard to think of any scenes he's not in, or if you can think of them, like Sybil telling Polly that Basil's forgotten their anniversary. It's all of the lead-in to John Cleese coming to do his bit.
So he very much is the fulcrum of the show and all the events and comedy sequences that happen in it. And of course, as I said, he is the starting thought for the show, this hotel manager in Torquay that he's based on. So I suppose that's very understandable. And it's not that the others don't do their own funny sequences and make us laugh. They do, but it's always in relation to something that Basil's done, something Basil's trying to do, some mess that Basil's got them all into or is about to. And that's how the show works, and I think it works very well in that way. But I think it's definitely right to say that Basil is the main character, the crux character. And what a marvellous job he does of being so. Of course, most of the time when Basil's getting into these scrapes and getting very worked up about everything in extreme ways and making us laugh, he is trying to do something in relation to the hotel, stop the hotel from getting shut down, get posh, high-class guests to the hotel and try and give it a bit of class. That's what he really wants from the hotel. And you can very much understand how he's got into these situations. And this manages to be maintained as the driving force behind the sitcom, the situation being here they are running the hotel, and the comedy being derived from that throughout the two series, with perhaps a little exception towards the end of series 2, which we might come back to when we have a few words about the episodes.
The USP of Basil's character, the thing that makes him so very funny, is his rudeness, isn't it? He is a rude hotel manager, which is a bit of an oxymoron. Hotel managers are supposed to be polite and courteous, and everything we say makes us think of an episode or two, and there's an episode really revolving around how Basil is rude to the guests. And you can hear the studio audience absolutely killing themselves laughing when he says things like, "Might I suggest you move to a hotel closer to the sea, or preferably in it?" And when he's calling one of the guests disgusting because he thinks he's wanting a chemist to go and buy condoms in. I know people like you get up to, and I think it's disgusting, and all that kind of thing. And then, of course, the other side to that is that he absolutely licks the boots of the posh customers, like the two doctors who come and Lord Melbury, who we'll tell you all about when we talk about the first episode. And Sybil says to him at one stage, "You never get it right, do you? You're always either crawling all over them, licking their boots, or spitting poison at them."
And she's absolutely right, and of course the characters are quick to point out each other's faults as they run this hotel together, and everything they say is very true. I like the bit that epitomises that quite well, where Sybil wants Basil to make sandwiches for Geoffrey Palmer's character in The Kipper and the Corpse, and Basil's very busy running the bar, and Sybil says to him, "Could you make a round of ham sandwiches, Basil?" And he's saying, "No, I can't possibly," and then Sybil goes, "For Dr. Price," and Basil's like, "Oh yes, of course, certainly, at once, Doctor," which sums him up perfectly. And of course by that point we know the characters so well, we know why Sybil said that and why Basil reacts that way and why it's funny. And I think we'll talk about Basil's interactions with the other main characters as we go through them. And of course, we've pretty much started on Sybil, his wife, already, who was played, as everybody knows, by Prunella Scales. And you might wonder, why did Basil and Sybil ever get married, and why did they open this hotel together?
I remember seeing in a documentary, because we've watched at least one of those, haven't we, about Fawlty Towers, Prue, as everyone calls her, talking about reading the script, and John Cleese saying to her, "Do you have any questions?" She says, "Yes, why did they get married?"
And I remember she said, Prunella Scales, probably in that same documentary, she thought perhaps Sybil had been quite impressed when she was younger by Basil's manners and perhaps sophistication, as she may have seen it, but the scales have fallen from her eyes since, and they've just become rather jaded with each other. But in some scenes you can see that they are rather fond of each other, and they do find each other's annoying ways quite endearing at times. I remember in the anniversary I was always quite surprised when I was young how upset Sybil was at thinking their marriage had fallen apart and Basil really didn't care about them as a couple anymore. But I guess now I do understand that, because they are actually quite codependent, even though they argue a lot, and that will happen if you work together, won't it, and be married.
When I'm thinking about Sybil and Basil and their role in the hotel, I remember this round on Telly Addicts, where a person sits and describes a TV show and some other people have to guess or work out what it is that they're talking about. And somebody was doing Fawlty Towers, and we got it because we recognised the names and the hotel and all that kind of stuff, but he got it quite wrong. He said, or maybe they were guessing the character, actually. Maybe they were trying to work out Basil, because he was saying he thinks he runs his hotel, but actually it's his wife Sybil. And we were like, what a load of old balls you're talking. Basil doesn't run the hotel particularly well, but he does slave away, doesn't he, to put the picture up, do the menu, serve meals, do the paperwork. You see him slaving away in the office sometimes. And often you see him getting quite annoyed with Sybil for not doing any work, and it's true that she is on the phone a lot, or refurbishing herself, as Basil puts it, doing her nails, and on the phone talking about what wig she wants to order and that kind of thing. So what that person on Telly Addict said was quite wrong. But then she's a sort of contrast to Basil, isn't she? She doesn't do as much work as he does, nearly, but then when she is dealing with guests, she's very polite and very good at interacting with them. I always remember how she's the one in The Kipper and the Corpse who tells Mr. Lehman's friends, workmates, that he has died after Basil and Polly and Manuel have got all into a very funny misunderstanding with them first. In Waldorf Salad, she gets on very well with the Hamiltons, who, well, Mr. Hamilton really is a very difficult guest, and if the guest ever asks her for anything, she says yes, certainly, and smiles and all that kind of thing. So she does have certain hotel management skills, but she doesn't do any of the grunt work.
Yes, and that's why they're both kind of good at running the hotel in their own way, and also both kind of terrible at it. And they kind of muddle along together. Sybil is very genuine with her friendliness and interaction with the guests, and a lot of them, as you say, like that quite a lot. And then sometimes you can see she is annoying some guests slightly, going on at them while they're trying to have their meal or be on the phone or something. And certainly, Prunella Scales made us laugh a lot watching the show, as I say, usually in relation to Basil and what he's done or hasn't done that's annoyed her. I remember I always quite enjoy the scene where Sybil's reeling off things that her mother's afraid of, open spaces, confined spaces, etc. And Basil's not really involved in that, but she's doing that thing where she's kind of annoying one of the guests who's trying to do something else. And then, of course, there's Andrew Sachs as Manuel. And the comedy here is that he is from Barcelona. He's Spanish and he doesn't really understand what people are saying. And he's foreign and it's funny.
Yes, you can't do that these days, can you?
We remark quite a bit watching it, oh, you couldn't get away with this sort of thing nowadays, and it's things that are quite throwaway and harmless back then, but are now terribly offensive. For example, the ingrained and very strong but very casual disapproval of homosexuality that is evident in quite a lot of places, which is very much to be expected from the 70s. And yes, the Manuel is foreign humour is very much the same. A lot of the humour between him and Basil is kind of slapstick stuff. And when I was young, I thought, and I still do now, that's not really one of the best aspects of the show. I think it could do without it. Sometimes I think they do overdo it.
Don't hit me, or as you hit me, he says at one point. It's true, Basil pokes Manuel in the eye at one stage, hits him with a spoon, hits him with a frying pan, and of course Andrew Sachs was telling us in the documentary we watched, he was thinking it's a good thing this is the last shot because I'm not going to be able to get up. He was genuinely injured on set quite a few times, it sounds like.
He went through a lot, didn't he, with the frying pan, as you say, and getting burned for the Germans. But what a wonderful professional. He just got on with it, and in those days the BBC could get away with doing that kind of thing and not get into trouble over it. But yeah, I always thought that aspect of the show, it's not as good or as clever or as unique as the funny, farcical stuff revolving around Basil messing things up and overreacting.
Of course, Manuel very often gets blamed, doesn't he? And or has to deal with the consequences, and it's the kipper and the corpse where they've been running around with the corpse trying to hide it from everyone for an entire morning, and he suddenly says, Mr. Fawlty, I don't want to work here anymore, and that's the last straw, all this running around trying to hide this dead guest.
That's very good, because you can see how that feeling has been built up to throughout that particular episode and the series as we know it so far. And then, of course, there's Connie Booth as Polly. Now, we did mention Polly before as one of these characters who's kind of normal, like Maggie Habib on the Thin Blue Line, kind of more you could see her in the real world than the other ones, and is put in this bizarre situation with the bizarre characters, and kind of reacts to them in a way we, the audience, can relate to. And that is true to some extent of Polly. She gets involved very easily in all the crazy, farcical situations, and she's not a lot more real than the other characters, but she is a bit, and there is something of that aspect to her.
She's certainly the character who's got all the sense, isn't she? She's the voice of reason.
I noticed the few times she does sort of unprofessional, vindictive things like Basil might do, like putting the hot sauce or whatever it is on the sausages of the dog.
You could believe Basil might do that to a human guest. Of course, Polly only would do that to the dog, which has bitten her. And when she's trying to sell one of her pictures, because she's an artist, to a guest, one in your room, you said you liked it, and he won't buy it, he's leaving, she mutters, you bastard. Basil would actually shout that well in his hearing, wouldn't he? So she does do that kind of thing to a much lesser extent.
Polly spends a lot of her time trying to help Basil get out of trouble. She finds Basil very frustrating and doesn't like the way he doesn't really appreciate her, and finds him a very negative aspect of her life in many ways, but she's always very quick to leap in and try and help him out of trouble. Ring up and try and persuade Sybil that Stubbs has done the building work.
Yes, that's the one I always think where it's really not in her interest. She'd do better to side with Sybil on that one, I always think. Really put herself on the line for Basil rather than just go along and try to help him to keep the hotel in business and keep her job. I guess that's her motivation. Not that it's a very good job, a very enjoyable, stress-free job, but maybe it's all she can get.
We notice, and indeed it's deliberately shown to us, how she has taken on more responsibility for the second series. It says in series 1, the fire drill, I'm only here at meal times. Who's going to do the upstairs rooms if it's not meal time? We know she does a lot more than be there at meal times, do waitressing by the time it's series 2, and she reels it all off for Basil in the anniversary when she's going to dress up as Sybil. All the things she does, and some of them she's being paid for, and some of them she isn't.
I remember when I was young thinking, well, she's the least comedic of the characters. I probably didn't think in exactly those words, but I might have thought I didn't like her as much. Same with Maggie Habib in the Thin Blue Line, but she can be funny when she needs to be. Like when she's trying to tell Mr. Fawlty, as she calls him, that Kurt is drunk and the dinner guests are there, and when it's the kipper and the Corpse and Mr. and Mrs. White, I think that's what she calls them, want to come into their room and they're hiding the body in there. But of course she's outside doing that, and it's Manuel and Basil who are inside doing the really comical stuff of trying to hide the body.
That's reminded me of the other one where she really leaps in for Basil, and it's not really to do with the hotel at that point when she's trying to cover up for him winning the money on the horse. She immediately comes in with, "Oh, it's my money, I won it on the horse." He's got no real reason at that point to protect him from Sybil's wrath.
Yes, she seems very happy for Basil when he's won the money. She says to Manuel, "Give it to me, I'll give it to him," and then she does. She says, "Oh, Mr. Fawlty, look what I've got for you," all pleased for him. He says, "Not a word to the dragon, eh?" She says, "Oh, no." So she seems to maybe feel quite fond of Basil, or think that he deserves his win on the horse, and on a personal level she doesn't want Sybil to find out.
Yes, and of course that leads to a good Basil and Manuel bit, which isn't all slapstick, all that "I know nothing" or "you know nothing" sequence.
Always you say, Mr. Fawlty, but I learn. And then he spends ages trying to make him understand you know nothing about the horse.
It's very protracted and goes round and round in circles, but it really works as a piece of comedy because you know how Basil's feeling, very frustrated, very desperate. You know how Manuel's feeling, very confused. That's the best kind of work out of those two, I think.
Yes, and it finishes up with, "Just don't say anything to anybody about the horse." And he goes, "I know that. You told me that this morning." It is Series 2, and in Series 2, Manuel understands more than he did in Series 1. I think maybe they feel like they've got pretty much everything they can out of that kind of comedy most of the time. But that is a very funny sequence with "I know nothing," isn't it?
Yes, of course, and then we come back to it later in the episode. Basil wants him to spill the beans, but no, after all that "you know nothing," what's he going to say? "I know nothing." Works very well. Coming back to that scene, structure is clever. There are 3 other characters who do appear, if only briefly, in all 12 episodes, and the most prominent of these is the Major, who was played by Ballard Barkley, whose final film role was in the BFG, voice in the BFG, about 10 years after Fawlty Towers. And I always liked the Major when I was young.
Very accessible humour, isn't it? But again, stuff that you can't do now because it's offensive.
Yes, he is rather senile, and that's where they get the comedy out of him. He is the person in the world who Basil seems to like the most, or is the most polite to, will have the least fraught conversations with. I was reading, I think, on Wikipedia, an observation saying Basil probably approves of the Major. He's the class of person Basil approves of, the senior army officer, not what Basil would consider the proles, the filth, the lower echelons of society. And I think that was a fair point to make. Of course, Basil does find Major rather frustrating, annoying at times.
Like in that Mrs. Richards episode, he wants Major to look after the money for him that he's won on the horse, and we're saying, "No, don't give it to the Major, he'll forget." And of course he does, and he won't vouch for Basil when Mrs. Richards is saying his money is her money. Remember that, old boy.
And what's Basil's comment about the Major, who's always very keen for the bar to open promptly at 6? Drunken old sod. But nevertheless, he does seem the fondest of the Major, and he's always quite pleased to have a conversation with the Major, no matter how round in circles and nonsensical it becomes. And you don't get to see the Major interact with the other main characters apart from Basil a great deal, and that just backs up how Basil very much is the fulcrum of the show, of the comedy.
Yes, we could make a little list, couldn't we, of when he does, but we probably won't mention all of them. But that's quite a funny sequence, certainly when you're a child, where he has a conversation with Manuel, but Manuel's behind the desk on which is the moose's head, so Major thinks he's having a conversation with the moose's head. But then, of course, that leads to another conversation with Basil. The moose has been saying, "I can speak English," and all that kind of thing, and Major wants to know if it was Japanese, I think that's what he says. Fawlty says, "Canadian, I think, Major." And the Major says, "No Canadians were as clever as that," which seems a very odd thing to say about a moose's head that you're going to mount on your wall.
And you'll see Major exchanging words with the other main characters, other guests sometimes. He enjoys a chat with the other guests. It's very welcoming when he meets all Basil's anniversary party. How do you do? Welcome to Torquay and things. He's a real old gentleman. I remember spotting when I was quite young that he does, at least in his more lucid moments, know Polly's name. You'll often see him and the other two characters who we'll mention in a moment, two ladies, in the background in the dining room at their regular tables by the kitchen door having their meals. Polly brings Major his soup and he says to her quite audibly, thank you, Polly. But he doesn't usually call her Polly in the script, and sometimes you think perhaps he sees Polly around and thinks she's Elsie, who's actually been in Canada for 2 years, or other waitresses that they've had in the past, and they've all kind of melded into one for the Major. But like all of us, he has more lucid days, I suppose.
I remember being quite surprised to see the Major and the ladies just living there in this hotel. I said to Mum, you could do that. And she probably said something along the lines of, you probably can't really do it nowadays. Hotels are probably a bit too expensive. But back then, if you got old and you just wanted to be looked after and you had enough money, you could go and just live in a hotel.
Major, you've been here 7 years. You don't have any complaints, do you? Oh, no, I love it here. And he does. And he still gets out and about. He goes to memorial service, pops out to various things around the town, and then can't remember the next day when and where he's been. I went to the theatre, of course. No.
Yes, he is playing golf as well that time when he meets Basil and Sybil's friends, and they're going to see Sybil because Basil said she's ill, and Major says, playing a match, is she? He can't separate what he's just told Basil from what Basil just told him. And you're not really supposed to laugh anymore, are you? It's offensive, but, well, we still find it funny.
Reminds me of the Kipper and the corpse. Basil's letting Major in on the secret because he thinks Major won't overreact. The guest is dead. Shot, was he? Says Major. That's the only way he can really get to grips with someone might have died. No, he died in his sleep. Well, you're off your guard, you see. He must have been shot. Absolutely brilliant stuff.
Yes, and he sees the same body later and says, another one, Fawlty.
No, same one, Major.
Like it's no big deal.
And then, of course, he says to the corpse at the end, what's going on, old boy? He hasn't really retained the information. Absolutely wonderful stuff from Major. And yes, I think he is probably the happiest, most contented overall character in the show. Not just because he's senile and he forgets what he's been doing, but he's very happy with his position in life, living at the hotel, popping out and doing various things, and the people he interacts with, and he has a very good time. Not in the way that Basil would disapprove of. A very good time, but a very nice life living at the hotel, and one we've both envied at times, I think.
Yes, very nice existence, getting all your bedroom done every night and getting your meals cooked for you.
Of course, he doesn't have to get burned or hit on the head with a saucepan, but he very gamely carries on with the scene where Sybil's thrown coffee all over him, and it was supposed to go all over Basil. It's Mrs. Richards' communication problems, and Major does the whole rest of the episode absolutely dripping with coffee. And we didn't used to spot that so much on the videos that we had, but since Rosie's DVDs, it's very obvious he's absolutely soaked with coffee all over his head and his jacket, and he's doing all these lines talking to Mrs. Fawlty and Mrs. Richards about the money. But he carries on very professionally, and a wonderful performance. And the ladies are in a similar position to the Major. They live in the hotel. Basil says to them in Series 1 something about your rooms, but then a couple of times in Series 2 it's revealed they have a room together, and we see it, of course, in the Kipper. And I think it makes a lot of sense that they have the same room, which they've gone in on together. They're always hanging around together. The most time they spend apart is in the Kipper of the Corpse, while Miss Tibbs is collapsing and freaking out and being looked after in the bar and all the office.
Yes, and getting locked in the cupboard, of course.
Don't see Miss Gatsby for a long time in that one, and then they meet up again together at the end.
We see her separately at the beginning, don't we? You're very cheerful this morning, Mr. Fawlty. Yes, well, one of the guests has just died. Oh, you are wicked.
Just so she gets a bit of screen time there. And yes, in some episodes, they barely have any screen time. First episode of all, they just sort of pop out and say, good morning, Mr. Fawlty, don't they? And then leave to go on a little walk, and you don't see them again. And often they'll do something of that level of involvement in the episode, but sometimes they like to use them a bit more, and they certainly add something to the show. Miss Tibbs was played by an actress called Gilly Flower, and I think she's the one who lived into the 21st century. And Miss Gatsby was played by Renee Roberts. And by being there and doing their thing, they certainly add a lot to the show and anchor the world of Fawlty Towers by being a regular part of it.
I can think of one time they're sort of annoying Mr. Fawlty in The Builders, where he and Sybil are going away for the weekend, and they're stopping him from going and saying, Ursula and I think you're a very naughty boy, don't we, Ursula? And he's going, oh, God, and then politely trying to chuckle along with them. And at one point, the other one's name is mentioned. I think it's Miss Tibbs saying that, so it's Ursula Gatsby.
I always thought it sounded, and it does sound like Agatha, Miss Tibbs' first name, but you see it written down and it's Abitha. But that's reminded me of another thing I read that I meant to mention, which described Basil's reactions to interactions with the ladies as ranging from casual friendliness to obsequious patronising sort of thing to absolute aggressive frustration. And yes, you do see all three at times.
We'd better just mention Terry as well, haven't we?
Ah, yes, of course.
Who is the chef in Series 2, and he's in all 6 episodes of Series 2. In Series 1, they talk about chef, and I think they must get through at least 3, one before Kurt, then Kurt in Gourmet Night, which we'll tell you about, and then whoever's there for the Germans, because I'm sure they must have sacked Kurt after what happened. But then by the time you get to Series 2, they've got Terry, and he seems to have some staying power, and how much you see him really varies quite a lot. Sometimes he'll just do a scene, and then in the last episode, Basil the Rat, he's really quite a major character and one of the gang, and he will sort of say what he thinks. That's what I always think they're going for with Terry. Basil's there, freaking out, having a go at him, whatever, and he will just stay calm and give back honest, sometimes quite sassy answers and not worry too much about the consequences, like in Basil the Rat when the health inspector's been and he's threatening to close them down. Terry's saying, thought we was in trouble there for a minute, and then Basil's freaking out, saying they're going to close us down, and Terry doesn't seem worried at all, and that's the kind of thing he generally does.
Yes, it's mentioned at some point that he's been with them for 6 months or something, and you can work out that there's supposed to be about 3 years between the two series. It's actually 4 years between broadcasts. They've been married for 12 years in the first series, and then it's their 50th wedding anniversary in the second. So, yeah, they've perhaps been through a few chefs, and Terry maybe is the first one with, as you say, any kind of staying power. And I wasn't sure when I was young that he really added anything to the show. I wasn't sure I liked him that much, but he does add something, an extra regular character, an extra perspective on things. Someone to involve in the farce, like when they're looking for Basil the Rat and so on.
And you know, it does mean they can use the kitchen for actual cooking scenes. In that episode that they showed first, the wedding party, but it's actually episode 3, we've discussed this, haven't we? We see a corner of the kitchen when it's not in use. And the only time we see the kitchen proper and any cooking going on is Gourmet Night, where they've got Kurt. And though he is drunk and they have to do the cooking themselves, it does mean that there's cooking going on, and the kitchen can be part of the episode.
Yes, coming away after watching the whole thing, it seems that they do a lot in the kitchen and in the upstairs lobby sort of area, and they do in series 2. And then once you've watched series 1 a few times, you find that the upstairs is only featured, well, the main set bit that we know so well is only featured in the wedding party. You get a bit of upstairs in the Builders, but it's very nondescript. And the kitchen, really, big kitchen set with the table and cooking and everything, is only featured in Gourmet Night. So there's something they do for series 2. They take all their locations and think very carefully about what scenes are going to go where and use them very effectively. Indeed, as we've spotted this time, you can see every set location in all its glory used extensively in the episode Kipper and the Corpse. Thank goodness for that. So a word now about all 12 episodes. The first episode is a touch of class with the con artist, fake Lord Melbury. It really is a good first episode to lead with, but the BBC obviously didn't think so for their repeat run because, as I say, they've transposed it with episode 3. But it introduces the whole concept very well, and you very much get the idea of Basil as a character, what he wants from the hotel, the guests who come to stay in the hotel. And it's very funny, Basil's obsequious interactions with Lord Melbury. Oh, please don't bother with that. And how he changes in manner so much once we get, I am Lord Melbury, so I just use the name Melbury. And you do get the extremities of the comedy that Basil does regularly when it all comes out and police are there and so on. Basil's rushing around getting his money back, kicking Lord Melbury when he's on the floor and stuff.
It introduces the other characters as well, of course. Manuel coming in with his trays, not being able to understand Basil saying it's too much butter. And of course, one really big reason why they shouldn't move that episode is that the sex changes in the next episode.
That's really why we spotted that they'd done it after watching the recorded videos of it only a couple of times. Because, yeah, the doors are, well, pretty unique in The Touch of Class, and they get changed in The Builders, which is the second episode. And it's funny. Not one of the most enduring, I think, overall, but certainly has its place in the series.
It's the episode in Series 1 with no guests except the ladies and the Major, as Fawlty tells us. Just the ladies and the Major. We like to spot those, don't we? Because normally the comedy comes from who the guests are and how Basil interacts. But this time it's O'Reilly and his thick Irish builders, which really is quite offensive now, and the one that I think seems, from the world I've grown up in, a bit much in the 70s, perhaps the kind of humour that had died out by the time I was young, unlike senile old people and foreigners not being able to understand English properly for comedy purposes. I was a little bit horrified by the thick Irish builders. Of course, Basil's not there for quite a bit of that, so it's Manuel leading the comedy scene when Man with Beard and the other builders arrive and the guy delivering the garden gnome. You want room 16 for him? And all that kind of thing. But then, of course, Basil comes back and reacts to what has happened.
It's interesting, just over 20 years later, the BBC still thought they could get away with his big Irish characters when Pauline Fowler went to meet her unexpected Irish family on EastEnders, and then they got tons of complaints about the Irish characters that she met along the way.
Sometimes you watch something on the television and you think, oh, the person who wrote this must be old, and not realise you can't do that anymore, and I guess that was one of those times.
And the third episode is The Wedding Party, which they led with in the repeat run. And in some ways I can see why they did, because it is extremely funny, and it does kind of establish this is the sit of Fawlty Towers and this is the comedy we get out of it. Here are some guests. Basil is thinking certain things about them, overreacting in certain ways, and they're finding him rather strange, and it's providing a lot of comedy. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot when I was little. Basil accidentally bursting in on the guy, Mr. Lloyd, with the young woman, who's actually his stepdaughter, and then with Polly a few seconds later, and Basil's reaction to that. And this room is a much nicer room than the one we've given you, and all that comes off it. I'm so sorry I made a mistake. So it is a very good, very striking, memorable, establishy type of episode, but definitely should be left as episode 3.
I don't think it's a good one, though, to start with, for a child particularly. Partly because I didn't get some of the adult humour. I say this, but I did happen to know that you could get condoms from the supermarket when I was a child, so I didn't get why it was funny that Alan, the guest, wanted a chemist quite late at night, and then he wanted batteries. It's for his electric razor. Basil's going, batteries, eh? And I really didn't understand that he was thinking of dildos, vibrators, even though I kind of knew what those were, maybe from Red Dwarf, where that's hinted at, and probably I got Mummy to explain, but I thought it was a very strange conclusion to leap to. It's because of the whole picture of them that Basil has built up that I didn't understand, because we were in a quite free-speaking household, weren't we? And I couldn't understand why Basil didn't want to give them the room with a double bed when he found out they weren't married. I was like, what's the big deal? Our cousins who were older than us had boyfriends and girlfriends that everyone knew they were sleeping with. So I said I couldn't understand some of the adult humour. It was more the sort of prudishness aspect that I couldn't understand. But the other thing is that the characters aren't introduced quite so well, or certainly Manuel isn't, because when you first see him, he's not even in the room. He's shouting through the door to Mr. Fawlty, who's saying, "I thought you'd gone." No, I turned it off. We like to quote that sometimes. But it's not obvious that he's a porter and a waiter, and you don't really get the misunderstanding humour very clearly like you do in the scene in which he's really introduced. And you have to wait till the next day to see him actually doing his work in the hotel, and at that point he's hung over and falling over, which still isn't the best way to introduce him, is it? So I might have realised it was very funny, but also not got as much out of it as I could have when they showed that episode first. And if you do watch it third, and you understand Basil and his prudishness, it's a very funny episode. Arguably the funniest one in series 1.
The fourth episode is called The Hotel Inspectors, but spoiler, you only see the 3 hotel inspectors for a mere moment at the end of the episode. But of course the comedy comes from Basil thinking that a couple of people, are hotel inspectors. It has a very memorable performance from Bernard Cribbins as Mr. Hutchinson, and we've always enjoyed it very much. Basil's varied interactions with the characters he thinks are hotel inspectors, how he's with them in order to try and suck up, make the hotel seem okay, better than it is, and how vindictive and angry he is when Mr. Hutchinson turns out not to be a hotel inspector. I'll get him for that. Sybil's quite right to point out to Basil, it was all your mistake, your misunderstanding. No excuse for rudeness.
Of course, Mr. Hutchinson's been rubbing him up the wrong way ever since he arrived, when he thinks the other guy is a hotel inspector. I do remember we find it funny when Basil's telling him he's a wine expert, and he's going, "I'm not an expert." But he hasn't been rubbing Basil up the wrong way, so when he finds out he's not the hotel inspector, Basil's really just relieved, and then he's happy because it means that he can put custard pie and stuff all over Mr. Hutchinson without worrying that a hotel inspector's going to see.
Mr. Hutchinson is one of these genuinely difficult guests. You can sympathise with Basil for being frustrated and annoyed by them. He's not as bad as Mrs. Richards, but as Sybil points out, you really should still be polite to the customers. You weren't so busy arguing with the guests, you might get something done, she says to Basil at some point, which is true in some ways, but he still gets a lot more done than she does. Gourmet Night is episode 5, and I think this perhaps was my least favourite when we used to watch it on the video. I mean, it's still very funny, and it has some very good, very memorable, very quotable bits. They get absolutely shafted, Basil and Sybil, by their friend Andre the chef, foisting off this drunken, lecherous chef, Kurt, onto them.
Of course, turns out he's a homosexual, which in those days was synonymous with lecherous, wasn't it? Inevitably he would be coming on to the male waiters. Although they don't go into that very much. Basil says, "I knew I shouldn't have hired a Frenchman," and when Polly says he's Greek, that's worse, they invented it, but that's really all you get, and you might expect more homophobia than that from the 70s.
Basil wishes that Manuel had put up with a bit of homosexuality in order to make Gourmet Night go smoothly. Oh, what's one little kiss?
Of course, Basil's motivation in that one is that he wants Gourmet Night to be a regular thing and get the hotel on the map of the posh people. And it's a very funny sequence where he's freaking out and falling over his own feet in the presence of Colonel Hall and Mr. and Mrs. Twitchin, and Colonel Hall has a wife as well, too small and dry, and Basil thinks he's talking about the wife, and says, "Oh, I wouldn't say that," but of course he's asking for sherry.
And of course it has all that bit, "Sorry, I fainted." You can't say Mr. and Mrs. Twitchin because the Colonel has a twitch. I mean, it's very funny stuff. I just don't think I did enjoy it as much as running around the hotel doing farcical stuff, but it's certainly a bit different. Of course, it has the very famous damn good thrashing car sequence, which we never really particularly enjoy, but it always makes the top 10, 14 Fawlty Towers moments or 70s comedy moments lists if you see them. I saw an episode of Shaun the Sheep once, not on purpose, where it had an alien landing in the field with the sheep and its spacecraft was broken. The alien went off and got this stick and started beating the spacecraft with it.
Gosh, that's one for the parents or even the grandparents, isn't it?
That's right. It's a comedy reference that people find accessible and you do put in for your older audience in a show like Shaun the Sheep in the early 21st century. The final episode in the first series is The Germans, and yes, apparently the story is that it was shown at an unexpected time earlier than the others because some sport wasn't happening or something, and more people got to see it than were probably planning to see it anyway, and it was really very well received, and they did a whole repeat of the first series, which then got record ratings on the strength of The Germans. As you were saying, everyone just really enjoyed seeing John Cleese doing the silly walk from Monty Python, didn't they?
Yes, I think so.
And of course he'd done the Hitler impression on Monty Python as well, that on Fawlty Towers goes with that silly walk.
You know, when I watched it, I really didn't associate John Cleese with Monty Python. I probably hadn't watched Monty Python very much as a child. I think I used to find it quite boring. So I was slightly surprised when I found out John Cleese, Basil Fawlty, was one of the Pythons. So I didn't kill myself laughing at the funny walk, but it is very funny when he's got his concussion and he's saying things that, you know, Basil would kind of like to say, but to that extent he normally has his filter.
Yes, he does need the concussion in order to say those things.
Who won the bloody war anyway? That's how it finishes up, and of course there's quite a lot of build-up, isn't there? And then in the hospital, before he even gets back to the hotel, it's introduced with, my God, you're ugly, aren't you? Straight to Sister's face. And earlier on in the episode, Sybil's there for her ingrowing toenails. Sister's come in, and Basil has made veiled comments that he thinks she's ugly. Oh no dogs in here. Well, that's debatable, that kind of thing. So you can really see the way that episode is structured, how the concussion just takes away that filter and takes it to the extreme, and then he goes back to the hotel, and oh dear, there are some Germans staying.
We always find it quite interesting in that one how he reacts to the doctor in the hospital, don't we? He does have his normal, quite obsequious manner with him because he is the doctor. When he first sees the doctor, he physically leaps back in surprise because the doctor is black, and he's not used to seeing black people.
Certainly he wouldn't be expecting a black doctor, would he? But again, I sort of at the time thought maybe they were going to go into it more, the surprise of a black doctor, but once Basil's over the initial shock, he's fine with it, isn't he? And he doesn't even say anything when he's concussed and he sees the doctor. He gets used to it very quickly, which is as much as we can expect from someone like Basil in the 70s.
So then, Series 2, it was certainly a very good idea to come back and make 6 more episodes 4 years later, and then not make any more. On documentaries, I think they've said, John Cleese, Connie Booth, perhaps other people, we could easily have written 2-3 more series of 6 episodes each. BBC seemed keen for us to, but we thought, well, it'll never be as funny again. Let's leave it going out on a real high, and what a very wise decision that was. It's true, you should leave them wanting more. Otherwise, when we podcast about things, we just talk about how good they used to be at the beginning, and then they went all rubbish. And even something like The Thin Blue Line, where we say, well, it's well worth getting a second series out of it, but that's definitely the right place to stop. Fawlty Towers, you don't get that sense. They didn't just squeeze a second series out of it, and it was definitely the right place to stop. They did a very high-quality second series, well up there with the first, that made a brilliant set of 12 episodes that everybody quite rightly remembers so fondly.
Goodness me, they don't stop at the time to stop now, do they? They just keep going until the ratings fall, but the problem is the ratings never fall because people just keep watching the stuff even though they know it's not as good.
And the first of those new 6 episodes is called Communication Problems, sometimes listed as being called Mrs. Richards.
That's what I normally call it.
Very understandably, because she is a very memorable, very well-used guest character, and she is one of these very difficult guests with her hearing aid that she doesn't want to actually use because it runs the batteries down. Nothing's good enough for her. She loses her money herself and then blames the hotel. She's that sort of person. As Sybil says, what do you do with someone like that? And of course, put her in situations with Basil, and what's going to happen? A lot of classic Fawlty Towers comedy.
Of course, Sybil, as usual, is very polite and helpful to Mrs. Richards' face, isn't she? You do get the sense of her finding the guests annoying there, and I think, thinking back to Mr. Hutchinson, she's probably finding him quite irritating, but she never lets it show in her dealings with the guest. But she says it all to Basil behind Mrs. Richards' back, all that give her 10 from the till and stuff, when her money, which is actually Basil's money, is £10 short. But with Basil, he will just do it to the guest's face. Of course, Mrs. Richards a lot of the time can't hear what he's saying because she's got her hearing aid turned down. And of course, just to cause her discomfort and give himself a little satisfaction, Basil starts mouthing at her, pretending he's talking normally, so she turns her hearing aid up, and Sybil saying to him, "Basil, don't!" She isn't surprised to see him doing that. You don't get any sense that she thinks her saying "don't" will get him to stop, but she does it anyway. And then when she's got her hearing aid turned up, he shouts right into the microphone bit.
The second episode in Series 2 is called The Psychiatrist. It's very, very funny, and it has something that I've thought at times might be my favourite bit, which has a lot of build-up to it, where the psychiatrist and his wife, the paediatrician, Dr. Abbott and Mrs. Dr. Abbott, 3 doctors, they're both quite convinced by coming towards the end of the episode that Basil is quite mad from the things he's been doing and saying and the way he's been around them. It's partly due to his nervousness at there being a psychiatrist at the hotel. But it kind of culminates in Basil appearing at their window in the dark in the middle of the night. He climbed up this ladder. We know why he's done it. He tried to look in room to see girl who had been snuck into the hotel by this young man that Basil doesn't approve of the sort of person he is at all. They're desperate to catch this illicit woman in his room.
And for once, Basil's right, isn't he? She really is there.
But of course, accidentally, he's put the ladder at the wrong window, and what do they end up doing? Spying on the Abbotts as they're getting ready for bed, and they're sort of taking off their clothes, and then they see him looking in at them at the window, and that really clinches it for them.
That's very funny, isn't it? And he's been kind of hiding around and tapping doors and walls, saying he's checking them, so that he starts tapping the windows in the same way, and then of course he falls off the ladder. Manuel's helping him with that sequence, of course, showing how Manuel really will just do anything Basil wants.
The third episode in that series is Waldorf Salad, and I think we both agree it's the least good episode of all, don't we?
When we were young, we used to miss it out, I think.
Wow. And it does have another of these quite difficult guests. He's not as bad as Mrs. Richards, of course, Mr. Hamilton, but he does come in and demand that the chef should stay past time and order something that isn't on the menu, and is a guest you can see why Basil is getting into a state about. But Basil does cause himself a lot of trouble there with letting Terry go and impersonating the chef in the kitchen, a letter from the chef, that sort of thing.
Yes, after Mr. Hamilton has his Waldorf salad and is satisfied. There's really 2 points where Basil digs himself deeper into the hole when he doesn't have to. There's that one, and before that Terry's actually agreed to stay, hasn't he? And Basil makes him leave after it turns out he's missing a hot date rather than the karate class.
And we do enjoy that one, certainly now, well enough. Laugh out loud moments, quotable bits. But yes, it's going at the bottom of the list of episodes ranked in order of how good they are, even though all of them are much better than most sitcom episodes you might come across on the telly. The Kipper and the Corpse is very funny. It involves Basil and Manuel carrying the corpse around the hotel a lot of the time, and that is where most of the comedy comes from. But of course it involves a lot of people, including, as was mentioned, Miss Tibbs and Mr. and Mrs. White, who want to get into their room, seeing the corpse at various times, being where it shouldn't be, and Geoffrey Palmer does a funny turn as Dr. Price is so desperate to get his sausages.
Look, I'm a doctor and I want my sausages. The audience love that that line. And it's really the most Miss Tibbs gets to do by quite some way, and quite shocking, really, if you think about if it happened in real life. They lock her in a guest's wardrobe with the corpse, and then they're procrastinating on letting her out, because of course the guests are there. They can't understand why someone's in their wardrobe, and she comes out crying, going, "He's dead, it's her husband, died 20 years ago, she's never got over it." And what does Basil say when she comes out? "No, I've told you, you can hide in your own cupboard, but not in other people's." And then she's going, "In the cupboard, no more today." That's a very funny sequence in these two guests, Mr. and Mrs. White, who I mentioned earlier, can't understand what the hell is going on. And then a bit later, they put the body in the kitchen, and Dr. Price comes in, and he's saying, "You can't keep a dead body in here where there's food." And Basil's like, "Can't we?" "Of course not." That's very funny. But the bit that absolutely kills me, probably my favourite bit, is where his business associates, Mr. Lehman's business associates, have come to collect him, and they've got the body in the laundry basket. So Basil's saying to them, "He's in the basket." What's he doing in the basket? Well, not much. And then they're showing them in the basket, and then Polly realises the laundry van's gone. Basil goes, "Oh my God, they've taken him!" So they run out after the laundry van, come back in with this other basket, say it's all right, he's in this one. And the people who've come to take Mr. Lehman to his meeting can't understand what's happening at all.
And the kipper is quite incidental, really. It's made it into the title, but it's only in a small bit of the episode. But it is funny. Basil thinks they poisoned him with the kippers, and he's trying to hide the kipper sticking out of your jumper. And that's just a lead into the greater farcical comedy to come, really.
Of course, he's taken Mr. Lehman his breakfast, hasn't he, and not realised that he's dead. That's a funny sequence, too. He's chatting away to him. "You don't mind if I turn the light off?" And he's lying there dead.
Not a single word. Of course not. He was dead. Yes, and all the Polly's brought him the milk. Well, why did you bring him the milk if you already knew he was dead? All that sort of thing. Basil has to admit he's been in and seen the guy and not realised he's dead.
Just because a guest isn't singing "Oh, what a beautiful morning," I don't immediately think, "Oh, there's another one snuffed it in the night." One of those rants he goes off on that the audience love.
Then it's the anniversary, which you can discover if you're interested in that sort of thing. Production was delayed by a week because of certain work guys striking at the BBC, which caused one guest part to be recast, but little did they realise how much of a gap they were going to have before the final episode, Basil the Rat, because of those strikes. But it is a very good one, the anniversary. Polly dressing up as Sybil. I mean, that's accessible. When you're young, we always enjoyed that.
I do remember thinking that's not going to work, is it? They can't make Connie look like Prue, which again in this documentary, I believe, they told us people had been saying at the time, but then they did. She looks just like Sybil. It's extraordinary.
The wig is a big help, of course, but they do a lot of work with the padding of the face, and it's really very convincing and really very funny. Don't hit our friends and so on. We love all that. And that really is the one where the trouble, the farce they're getting into has nothing to do with the hotel. There's no guests in it. These 6 people have come round for the anniversary party, and Basil could very easily, at various times, just tell them the truth. Well, Sybil's gone off in a huff. Perhaps she'll come back and join us. But he gets himself into this ridiculous situation of pretending she's ill and then having Polly dress up. Gets deeper and deeper into that, and it's just driven by Basil's desire to make everything seem okay, to make it seem that Sybil's there for no particular reason. There's not going to be consequences if his guests do learn the truth, but it's just to provide that Basil Fawlty comedy that we all love so much. And of course Polly helps him get in deeper and deeper. I think you ought to tell them, and Basil's going, "Oh right, yes, he's going to tell them the truth," and then Polly encourages him further into it about the doctor coming this morning.
And that's the one in series 2 with no guests apart from the ladies and the major, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the people that Basil's dealing with are his friends, so the interaction is very different. They're neither Dr. Price or Dr. Abbott, nor annoying guests that he absolutely spits poison at. And for the most part, he is sort of nice to them and seems to like them, but then the situation is frustrating him very much, and he starts having a rant at one stage. "If that isn't enough, I'll refund your petrol for you." And one of the rather forgettable husbands, it's the 3 wives and 1 husband who do the most talking, one of the rather forgettable ones says, "Steady on, Basil, they know what he can get like." When they would, wouldn't they, because they're his friends.
And thank goodness they did come back 6 months after all these strikes were going on to make the final episode, Basil the Rat. I remember the documentary showing us a news report saying, and now, because of these strikes, the final episode of Fawlty Towers will never be made. The narrator of the documentary was saying a somewhat premature assessment on the news report, but it did take a while to organise and come back to. And they made a very good, funny closing episode that very much went out on a high and left people with the impression of, wow, Fawlty Towers was always brilliant, and indeed it's a very accurate impression.
You were saying, weren't you, in the 70s, they didn't really have pet rats. If there was any rat in the hotel at all, even if it was a perfectly hygienic pet rat in a cage, the health inspector would immediately close down the hotel if he caught a sight of it. So then, of course, Manuel's pet rat, which at some stage the man in shop cons him into thinking is a pedigree Siberian hamster, gets loose and they have to avoid the health inspector finding out about it. And a very funny sequence is Major spotting it, isn't it, and getting his gun.
That's right, it turns out he's had this shotgun in his room the whole time, and you never know when he's going to go a bit mad with it, and that was the time when he'd seen the rat in the bar. Major thinks there was a German in there.
Yes, he's muttering vermin, so Basil thinks that sounds like German.
Eating the nuts, if you please. Basil, he's really gone this time, but no, it's one of Major's more lucid moments, actually. Yes, one of the very first things the health inspector hears when he arrives for his check-up visit is the Major firing his gun, and he's not very impressed by that at all.
And of course there's all those very funny sequences with the veal. One of them's got rat poison on it, but they've all been knocked over and picked up again, so they've got mixed up now. No one knows which is which. As Terry says, the cat's had a bit. Has the cat had the poison bit? No, it hasn't. Yes, it has. So they're running around, taking away Mr. Carnegie, the health inspector's veal. Very, very funny.
It's got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of guests, guest stars, characters there, and it's a very good episode and very much, yes, a high to go out on. Of course, one thing we've both always found not so good about the anniversary is the use of Terry and Manuel in it, arguing over the paella, isn't it?
Yes, of course, they couldn't think of anything to do with them. They've got no guests to look after, which really is where the Manuel humour generally comes from, and Terry actually having anything to do, cook for the guests.
So that's much better in Basil the Rat. Everyone is properly involved, and Polly and Manuel and Terry are sort of a gang looking for the rat.
And Terry really is the hero of the hour with the veal, isn't he? How's the cat? The cat's alright, that slice is alright, pulling it out of the bin when it's been thrown away, what the eye don't see, the chef gets away with. You can't imagine Polly deciding to do all these things, so Terry really sorts that one out for them.
So it's a very good episode for comedy and for characters having things to do and interplay with each other, and yes, a high to go out on. And that was the final episode of Fawlty Towers, thankfully, because it was, as people should remember nowadays but never do, the right place to stop. And there seems the right place to stop this particular podcast. But hopefully you'll join us again next time, which will be the final Sunday in June, for a podcast on...
primarily Albert the Fifth Musketeer. I say primarily, that's what I expect. And also some other Musketeers adaptations.
Until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.